We are recording now, and for starters, if you don't mind, go ahead and give me your name, the spelling of your name, and then the title that you would like to see on the air.
My name is Greg Lemke. That's G-R-E-G-L-E-M-K-E, and I'm a professor at the Salk Institute.
Thank you so much. So today we're what would be the 106th birthday of Jonas Salk, and part of American history, or the world history actually, with the cure for polio. What comes to mind when you think of Jonas Salk on this occasion?
What comes to mind to me is the similarities of the circumstances. Basically, we have a setting where nowadays everyone is very much preoccupied with the novel coronavirus, with the penetration of COVID-19 into the population. And so we're really looking forward to the results for these vaccine trials, which should report in the next weeks and months. And I was born in the year when Jonas Salk announced the results of the polio vaccine. And this, people were waiting for that in the same way.
Yeah, certainly, I think we can appreciate at least, the pressure that must have been on him. Is that anything, since you, gotten into the same field, is that anything that you can touch on as far as the work that he did and the pressure that he must have, put upon himself to try and come up with a cure?
Yeah, so Jonas was under a lot of pressure at that time because his trial was the only trial. So there was a major investment in his research and in his vaccine trial by the March of Dimes. They put basically all their money on Jonas Salk. That vaccine trial was the largest clinical trial in the history of the United States. So he was under a lot of pressure. Today, for the coronavirus and for COVID-19, we've got a lot of parallel tracks. There are a bunch of folks trying to make vaccines, and they're using different approaches. And so in terms of the pressure, there's a community pressure now because everybody is very much concerned about COVID-19. In terms of pressure on individuals, it was much greater on Jonas back in the 50s with the polio virus.
And why Jonas Salk at that time?
Well, he was taken an approach. He was one of the researchers who had learned to grow the virus in culture. The Salk vaccine is basically a preparation of the virus, of the polio virus, in which the virus is killed by an aldehyde, by formalin. So you have this killed virus preparation, which to the immune system still looks like a live virus. And that approach was basically endorsed by the March of Dimes, as I said, and they were the people with the money at the time. They were the people who funded this effort. The March of Dimes was set up by Franklin Roosevelt and his law partner, Basil O'Connor, and they were the main funders of the polio research at that time.
Are there any lessons from Dr. Jonas Salk's research at that time that were still applicable as we now hunt for some sort of help with the coronavirus?
Perhaps to some extent. We'll have to see in terms of how these different vaccines work out. So the Salk poliovirus vaccine is a classical vaccine. Almost all the vaccines we get up till now have been, if they're against a virus, they're preparations of a whole virus particle in which you either grow the virus in a way that inactivates it, or you grow the virus up and then you treat it with some chemical that kills it. So these are whole virus vaccines. The ones we're testing now, a lot of them are more modern molecular biology-based vaccines where we're only expressing one protein of the novel coronavirus, a protein that we know we have to make antibodies to. So we're not growing up the whole virus. We're just expressing a part of the protein in the body and hoping that that will provoke an immune response that will protect us. So there are differences there. We always have to be worried about safety as well. You may know in the early days of the polio virus, one of the laboratories that was licensed to produce the virus cut corners to save time and to save money in prepping the vaccine. And as a result, they didn't kill all the polio virus. So they were sending out batches of the vaccine that actually had live polio virus in them. And this gave several hundreds of people polio. and actually ended up killing 10 kids because this company, as I said, was cutting corners. So we've got to be very sure about safety in all these vaccine trials. That's one of the reasons why in the trial, you're both tested to see whether the vaccine works, whether it gives you protection, and also whether it's safe.
Interesting. In the legacy that Dr. Jonas Salk, left, and we know of the Salk Institute and the work you continue to do. Can you talk about that? What Salk Institute is involved in these days?
Sure. So, in order to take these modern approaches to vaccines, for example, we have to know a lot about the basic biology of the virus itself, how the virus is constructed. We have to know how the virus infects cells. We have to know what receptors the virus uses to stick to cells and to get inside of cells and then to replicate. And we also have to know how our immune systems normally respond to these viruses or don't. And that's all the kind of work that we're doing at the Salk right now. So we're very, very interested in the structure of the proteins that make up the virus. We're very interested in how the immune system responds. So you may know that for many COVID-19 patients, they initially actually mount a strong response to the virus, but then they get into big trouble because their immune system goes way overboard and hyper responds. And so many patients actually die from their own immune system sort of going out of control, hyper responding to the virus. And that's one of the things in my own lab studies. We study how immune responses to viruses are normally regulated. And we have some ideas as to why that's gone wrong in COVID. So these are all legacies of Jonas's idea to create an institute that is focused on understanding fundamental basic biology, about how biology works, in this particular case, about how viruses work in the body. That's an important legacy from 50, 60 years ago.
As this kind of work continues to evolve, and now I even hear that computers are generating some of the methodology as far as trying to find and put together a response quickly. How far have we grown since the work of Jonas Salk until now?
We've come an enormous distance. All right. So there was no molecular biology basically in the early 1950s when Jonas started all the virology on the polio virus. We didn't even know the structure of DNA when he started. So now you're completely right. Basically, this virus was isolated. The novel coronavirus was isolated at the end of last year. And within a few weeks, molecular biologists were able to sequence the genome of that virus and to know every nucleotide in the virus genome and to know all the proteins that the virus encoded. And so scientists working with computer programs to try to design the best parts of those proteins to express so that you will make antibodies to those proteins got to work very, very, very quickly, right? So we didn't know the sequence of this virus a year ago from this day. We didn't know it. If I had asked you a year ago, what's the coronavirus, you would have had no idea, right? Well, people at the Salk Institute knew what coronaviruses were. And as soon as this sequence was established, people designed strategies to make vaccines that would express this so-called S protein, this spike protein that you see in all the pictures of the virus that's sticking out of the surface of the virus. That's the proteins you want to make antibodies to. And so we were able to do that really, really fast based on having molecular biology techniques. We couldn't have done that back in the 50s.
Just amazing. I mean, but in history now, the name Jonas Salk has a representation and as far as, changed the world, literally. Do you foresee that as we move forward in COVID-19, or will it be, will it be one researcher, or do you foresee that it's kind of a group effort, and now there are so many different labs involved? What's your thought there?
So you're right in that there are lots of folks that are trying to make vaccines, right? And they're using different approaches to the vaccines. They're using different ways of expressing these viral proteins in your cells when you're in. Sometimes some of them are using a virus to another virus to infect your own muscle cells or your other cells in your body to express this viral protein that your immune system can respond to. There are other people who are trying a more conventional approach, like the old Salk approach of growing up the virus and inactivating. We're going to have to see which one works best. And as I say, we're not going to have to wait too long until we get our first reports. So I think in terms of the United States, the two big trials that are ongoing now at two companies called Moderna and at Pfizer, they have different approaches. They're going to be reporting their first results from these large stage 3 clinical trials in the coming weeks and months. So we're going to know pretty soon how well that works. It is entirely possible that we may have multiple vaccines and that we may have multiple approaches. We'll have to see when we get the results. It may turn out that one vaccine is much better than the other. So we'll just have to see.
Any other thoughts, and as we, celebrate Jonas Salk's 106th birthday and, a time where we look back and we need that kind of inspiration?
Well, I think it's a great legacy. You got to think back about what the fear we were experiencing in the country in the 1940s and 1950s. We had a president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was paralyzed by polio. And so we had this sort of constant presence of fear, particularly in the summertime. Polio was an infection that waxed and waned during the seasons in the Northern Hemisphere. So you had this persistent fear. Now we have this consistent thing of COVID hanging over basically the heads of everybody in the population. And so when we have some approach that's going to give us some measure of protection to that, it is going to be transformative, I think, in the same way that developing the polio vaccine in the mid-1950s was transformative in terms of how people lived their lives and sort of free of fear of this infection.
We're all waiting for that time where we can get back to our regular lives. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Greg Lemke of the Salk Institute, thank you for speaking with us today.
It's my pleasure.